So welcome to ProVeg's webinar entitled Effective Vegan Advocacy, a discussion with Tobias Leonhardt with Q&A. For those of you who don't know ProVeg, we're an international food awareness organization working to transform the global food system by replacing conventional animal-based products with plant-based and cultured alternatives. Our vision is a world where everyone chooses delicious, healthy food for all. It's good for all humans, animals, and our planet. In other words, a vegan world, but we try to make it and put it in terms that most people would find appealing. And our mission is a stepping stone on the way to this grand vision of a vegan world, which is reducing the global consumption of animals by 50% by the year 2040. ProVeg's offices in Germany, that's where our head office is, Netherlands, Spain, Poland, UK, USA, China. Soon we'll be adding a couple more. And obviously we have ProVeg South Africa. And I'm Donovan from ProVeg South Africa. I run the team. And we have a very small team based in Cape Town. It's myself, and then Carolyn and Nanine, who are in the background helping us. So thank you to them for being here too. So to introduce our guest, Tobias Leonhardt, a lot of you will know him as the Vegan Strategist. And that is the blog that he runs and has been doing that for a very long time. He's an international thought leader and strategist in the vegan movement. He's the author of How to Create a Vegan World, A Pragmatic Approach, a book that I highly recommend to anyone, regardless of whether you're starting off your journey as a vegan advocate or you've been in the space for years. Along with Dr. Melanie Joy, who I'm sure many of you will have heard of, he runs CEVA, the Center for Effective Vegan Advocacy, through which they give talks and training on effective vegan advocacy around the world. He's also a co-founder of ProVeg International, the founder of the Belgian organization EVA, which is still the only vegan organization in the world to receive structural government funding. So we really do have an amazing person and one of my role models in the vegan movement. And welcome, Tobias, and thank you so much for being with us.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So let's get straight into it, and we'll start with the talk title. You know, we're talking about effective vegan advocacy, and you run training through the Center for Effective Vegan Advocacy. Please, can you give us a broad overview of how you differentiate between regular vegan advocacy and effective vegan advocacy?
Well, it's a bit of a hard question. I would say that we have to look first of all at the aim that we want to achieve, and that is we want to achieve, however you want to define it, liberation for animals, freedom for animals, the end of suffering, the end of animal use, animal abuse, whatever. And if we're going to be effective, we're going to look at everything that we do, at every intervention that we do, every campaign that we wage, everything that we write, every word that we say, basically, and we're going to ask ourselves, does this bring us closer to our goal? And I'm not gonna differentiate between effective and non-effective advocacy, but I would say it's a matter of emphasis. It sounds very natural for us to focus on impact and to focus on results, and probably everybody is going to say that they're doing that. But there is a real danger that we get lost in the woods and that we get maybe blinded by our own ideologies, by our own rules, by our own, by the behavior of our group, by the thinking of our group, and that we're not gonna look at effectiveness anymore, but we're gonna look at following the rules and sticking to the principles that we have and doing the things that other people in our group are doing. So those would be all distractions from the goal that we have. And we might be distracted consciously or unconsciously, intentionally or unintentionally. And I would say that, well, let me give an example. If you, as I do, if you would argue that talking about reduction of meat consumption is a good thing, then you would do that from a standpoint of effectiveness, in the sense that every time we can reduce somebody's consumption of animal products, that has a tangible impact for the animals. It is effective as such, right? And there it doesn't matter so much whether that person we influence is going to be, or it doesn't matter so much whether we use a vegan message or not. If you're not focused on effectiveness, you might say like, look, I have to use the vegan message all the time, every time. And that's more a focus on the principles and on the ideology and on the rules that we have, which I think is not the best focus, certainly not at this point in time. I hope that makes the distinction between, yeah, I would say in my book, I define it as an idealistic approach versus a pragmatic approach. Idealism is a concern with the ideals, with having everything right now, with our rules, with our ideology. Effectiveness is, or pragmatism is a concern basically with actual tangible results.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think that ties well into the effective altruism movement in general, which I know in South Africa is quite a new idea. Do you want to touch on just sort of what effective altruism is and sort of where veganism falls into that?
Yeah, so effective altruism is kind of like a philosophy and a movement that basically wants to do as much good as possible. And as much good as possible means that you're going to do good things, you're going to do things that you think are good, that have the biggest positive result possible, right? And again, this sounds very straightforward and logical and almost redundant, but let me give you a simple example. An example is a campaign that people had in several countries in the African continent, where the campaign consisted of, well, placing some sort of playthings. It was like a mill that kids could sit on, like this kind of like thing in like the playground, and you know, like you turn around on it. But this thing, while kids were turning around on it, also pumped water out of the ground, right? So it was called a play pump. And so it's very, very easy to be distracted by this wonderful idea, by the feeling that this gives you. Oh, it's a plaything, and at the same thing, it's got water out of the ground. How wonderful! And then it's very easy for people to like say like, oh, yeah, let's support this, let's give money, let's like be an ambassador for this. And a lot of people, celebrities, etc., gave money and were ambassadors for this. Now, the problem was that if you actually looked at results on the ground, if you did the research, you could see that this thing was not an effective intervention. Why? Because the kids really tired of these things very rapidly, and then women had to like use them to pull water out of the ground, which was like beneath their dignity. And in the end, these things were just rusting and not being used. So we can differentiate between feeling good about something and doing good, right? It's not because we feel good about something that it is actually causing good or generating good. And that's what we have to always be very worried about. And effective altruism always wants to say, don't just look at how you feel about an intervention, about a campaign, about a message, but look at the research, at the evidence, and use your rationality. Don't use just emotion, right? So effective altruism basically has 3 criteria to choose a certain cause, which are scale, how big is the problem, neglectedness, how ignored is the problem, like how many resources are already going into the problem, and the less resources already going to something, the more important it might be to like add to something or contribute to it. And the third one is the tractability, like is the problem actually solvable, right? Can we solve it? And actually, if you look at these 3 criteria, the topic of animal suffering scores very highly, unfortunately, right? Animal suffering exists at a massive, massive scale. It's 70 billion animals, only land animals counting, per year. It's neglected in the sense that a lot more money, 100 times more money, is going to human causes than to animal causes. And it's very tractable, it's solvable. We can solve it by changing our diet or consumption. And actually these 3 criteria could be a good answer to people, like especially in African countries, where you might get asked like, look, we have so much poverty here in Africa, in South Africa, and other African countries. why would we be concerned? Why would we donate? Why would we spend our time on helping animals while there is so much human suffering? So those three answers are, well, the scale is huge, the suffering is very intense and relates to very many individuals. Secondly, it's ignored. Nobody else does it. So I can have a big impact by working on this. And thirdly, unlike some other problems, it is very, very solvable, very tractable. So yeah, that's effective altruism in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I think it is something that we're slowly learning about more in South Africa. I think what you were saying about sort of measuring your impact, I think a lot about is social media. A lot of people are chasing likes and shares. And if we post stuff on social media, we should be always questioning who's liking it and sharing it. Is it just vegans sharing it with other vegans, or is this actually having an impact on someone? And so the question with those kind of things is it possible to measure when we're looking at impact? How do we know if what we're doing is actually impacting people, especially if it's sort of grassroots activism and we don't have a big organization or someone tracking results?
Yeah, it is definitely not easy. And one thing I can say is, fortunately, we're paying more and more attention to tracking and to doing research and to measuring whether what we're doing actually has an impact. And there are organizations like Animal Charity Evaluators.org or Faunalytics.org. Maybe you can put them in the show notes. So there's more and more money going to these things, and we're getting more and more knowledgeable about what works and what doesn't. On an individual level, we don't have like the measure or the tools or the resources to track if what we do has an impact. But what I see is that most people most individual activists would count like the number of vegans they created in their lives. Like I said, like I've already converted like 5 people or 10 people or 20 people. That's certainly like a measure for change. I would say that it's not the only measure. I mean, you can have like, maybe you converted 5 vegans, but somebody else converted 100 people to half their meat consumption, which would be a bigger impact than the 5 vegans. So you can do this all sorts of ways. I would suggest that, like, yeah, certainly on social media, you're very wary of the effect where people are going to cheer you who already are of the same opinion as you, right? So you might post something and you might think like, this is a good post of mine, but you might get 10 people saying like, oh, great, and they like it and they share it and they comment, but there might be 50 people who see it and who are turned off. So you have to always keep into account or take into account not just the people that you win, but also the people that you lose, and they might be a silent majority, basically, right? So the net impact of your actions is who you attract minus who you turn off, who you turn away.
Yeah, so it might be better to attract a huge number of people in a very small way than attract a very small number of people in a big way, like get a small number of people to go vegan and everyone else kind of is put off and doesn't want to engage with the topic again in the future.
Yeah, exactly.
And one of the things you said when you're looking at effective altruism, the first one is scalability. And I think that leads to the next question I wanted to ask you about, the difference between, advocacy looking at personal change, one-on-one, small groups of people, versus institutional change. Because obviously when we're looking at scalability, if we try to convince people to go vegan one-on-one, it's really hard to scale that.
Yeah. First of all, let me clarify. When I talked about the criterion of scale, it's not scalability, it's actually the scale of the problem. How big is the problem? How many beings does it affect, right? But so in the context of institutions versus individuals, yes. So many of us start as activists who are basically reaching other individuals. Like we are talking to our uncle and to friends and to colleagues, and it's basically on a one-on-one basis. And even if we create a booklet or create a blog or something, it's still a one-on-one basis, right? So the difference with an institutional approach is that you're going to still probably approach individuals, but they would be individuals who have the power over many other individuals or over a whole institution or infrastructure. And I would say that the more power these people have to influence, for instance, what's on the plates of other people, the more interesting it becomes to talk to them. So if you could use an hour of your time talking to your neighbor who's just like the head of a family about veganism, or you could talk to a restaurant owner about it, well, the choice is obvious, right? And then you could see like, yeah, a restaurant owner, they reach like maybe 30 people every day. But what if we talk to the people training the chefs in a school? So a person training a chef would maybe be training, I don't know, every year 50 students or something who are going to have their restaurants, each of them. And then you could go still higher in the chain. You could like talk to the director of a school who talks to all these trainers. Or you could even work on a government level where there are people who like might be responsible for changing the curriculum of all these teachers, right? So that's one example of going higher in the chain. So you have a multiplicator effect. You impact people who can reach many other people. And there's of course, other examples of institutional change. There's for instance, well, creating laws or lobbying for new laws, right? If you can get even a local government to do something for the animals, that will affect thousands of people. So in general, I would say, and there's a lot of consensus about this in our movement, that institutional change is going to be more helpful than individual change. But of course, not everybody has the skills or the resources or the connections to do that work. Individual change, one-on-one, working one-on-one with just people that are your peers, is usually the more obvious intervention. But if you can, if you have connections, if you have impact, if you have skills, you could choose to like focus on the institutional level, maybe with the help of an organization like ProVeg.
Yeah, I think it's often with the volunteers, it's hard to work on institutional work because it often takes longer hours and it takes relationships. But one of the things we saw that was really nice from our team in Johannesburg, they organized a dinner party at a restaurant, but as part of that was part of getting the restaurant to have more vegan options on their menu. And that was a chain restaurant, so they could impact the restaurant. So it's, organizing a dinner party, which would be an individual advocacy, but it's also kind of institutional because you're influencing the restaurant. So there's obviously a lot of crossover. And I think when we think about the institutions that we would work with, we obviously think about, catering companies and restaurants and government and maybe medical. One of the ones that we don't think about often, or many people don't think about, I know at ProVeg we think about it a lot, is the meat industry. And we've actually got a question from Peter saying, shouldn't we be helping out the meat industry rather than just criticizing them, assisting them with the transition of going into a vegan world? And what are your thoughts about how we should be relating to the meat industry?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent suggestion, and I'm always like in favor of collaboration over confrontation at this stage. That might be different in other stages, in other phases of our movement. But of course, you have to look at who you can influence and who you can help in this. And if you talk about the meat industry in general, depends on who you mean. So you have, I would say, you have three layers. You have the people who produce the animals, who raise the animals. Those are that's the farming industry. Above that, you have the people who like will process the meat and put that meat into products, make sausages and pizza and whatever of them. And the third level would be the people who distribute those products. So that would be supermarkets, stores, restaurants, right? And I think if you look at these three levels, the third one, the restaurant and the supermarkets, distribution, the second one, which is the processing one, the meat companies, those ones you can very well work with. because they don't really care, in a sense, what the resources are that they are using or that they are selling, right? Whether they use plant-based products or animal-based products to create a sausage or to serve a sausage in a restaurant, as long as it sells, it doesn't really matter. So these people, in my experience, and clearly, they are quite open to experimenting and to bring new products on the market. It's the first layer, and they're also part of the meat industry. Obviously, the farmers and the people who raise the meat, they have a harder time to find an alternative. You can, it's harder to say, like, look, you have all this infrastructure to milk cows, now use it to create tofu. Sometimes it can work. Some people have big sheds and they can create or raise mushrooms in them rather than pigs, for instance. Sometimes that can work, but often it doesn't. And those are the biggest enemies right now, I think, of our movement. And yes, it would be good to try to find ways to especially help them to transition towards something new. So that's one answer to that question. There's, of course, there's many aspects of that. Like what do you mean with helping? Shall we advertise their products, knowing that, well, we are helping an industry that also sells animal products? I'm very pragmatic in these things, but yeah, Don, if you have follow-up questions on that, this is like a bigger topic. We can discuss it further if you want.
Yeah, I think the question. Well, I first want to make the statement about something that ProVeg did. We spoke to a meat company in South Africa about producing plant-based meats, and their response was exactly that. It was like, you know, individuals do care. So when we think about these big companies, we always think, oh, there's these big evil corporations, but the individuals at those companies are usually just as caring individuals as average. Or, you know, there's no reason to think that just because you're the CEO of a big meat company, you don't care about the environment or health or animal rights. You're just in a position where you are providing a service that people want. So as soon as we said, do you want to create a plant-based range, the guy kind of laughed at me and said, no, who really wants this stuff? And after working with ProVeg and meeting with our ProVeg team internationally, they realized there is a market for it, and they spent a whole lot of money producing a product called Goodness Deli Slices, which I think are fantastic products. They're available around South Africa now. And it's just an example of somewhere where, you know, we can get these companies to invest their money somewhere else into something that is something we agree on. The problem is a lot of vegans would still say, oh, we don't want to support that company because the vast majority of their revenue is still coming from animal sources. So aren't we, by promoting them or by buying their products, aren't we paying for the rest of their business? What would your answer to something like that be?
Yeah, so I would say that well, no, it's probably not true, in the sense that, like, it doesn't make all that much sense for a company that if all of a sudden they see that their new plant-based line or range is growing tremendously, it wouldn't make all that much sense to put money from those sales all of a sudden in the range that is maybe not doing so well. I mean, they could do that temporarily or something to give it some support, but generally company is not going to do that. And actually there's examples of companies where the other way around is actually happening. So I know a company in the Netherlands close by that said, like, we're going to, it started as a meat company, and they started to provide vegan products at some point, developed a vegan line, and they said the income of this vegan line is so good that we think we might very soon stop selling animal products. So this is a company in transition to becoming a vegetarian or a vegan company. And they said, like, right now, we cannot stop the animal line yet because the proceedings, the profit of the animal products are being used to pay off the investments that we made for the plant-based products, right? So it's the other way around. It's like when people buy meat there, the part of the profits of that will be invested in the plant-based line, right? So I wouldn't be too afraid of supporting like a non-pure or a mixed company. I think it's the same with restaurants, right? Like some people say, I only want to go to a vegan restaurant. But well, we have to, as consumers, this is one of the things that we can do. It's increasing demand, right? Sometimes I justify my eating a lot of vegan ice cream by the fact that I'm increasing demand, right? We all have to like do our best to increase demand. Basically, it's consumerist, but I think it's one of the things that we can do. Another point when relating to companies is that sometimes we're expecting too much, and people will not only say that they're going to like use the money that their vegan products bring in for their animal line, but people will also say like, look, these companies are not doing it for the right reasons. They're doing it to make money. I would say like, yeah, of course they're doing it to make money. They're not non-profits, they're businesses. They have to make money for their stakeholders, for their investments, for investors, whatever, right? But this is part of what I'm saying in terms of like the contrast between idealism and pragmatism. The motives that people have, they don't matter as much as you think they do. We are, as an idealist, you would say like people have to do the right things for the right reasons. As a pragmatist, you say like anything that helps the animals for whatever reason people are doing it is fine, right? And so if these companies are putting vegan products on the market for money, that will help the animals. It may not help your anti-capitalist battle, right? But maybe that's something for later. Maybe that's something that we cannot do all at the same time, right? Or maybe if you want to prioritize anti-capitalism, yeah, then you can't go on board with, you can be on board with that. But that's not going to be the best for the animals, I think. If we only if we only rely on very pure, very idealistic, very good, very perfect plant-based companies, that's not going to be a fast road towards ending animal suffering.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. And there's two things that makes me want to ask about. And the first one is just money in the vegan movement in general. There seems to be this like distrust for money, all the way from, influencers who are getting paid to promote vegan products to, how much should people working in NGOs get paid? If I've been told if I complain about my salary, people will say, oh, but you're working for an NGO, you're doing something you love. So NGO salaries aren't expected to be high, but that might prevent other people from leaving, other very competent people from leaving their industries. And then other things like, NGOs accepting large donations from companies. Some people would say there's a conflict of interest in there. Where do you see money? What's the role of money in the vegan movement?
Yeah, we have as do-gooders, as idealists, as people who want to change the world and make it better, we often have a very strange relationship to money. And sometimes it seems to come down to the idea that people are allowed to make money with evil stuff, but not with good stuff, right? If you do something good for the world, you're not allowed to make money, which is very strange if you look at it, right? We would allow somebody who sells something like soap or does something worse than that to make money, but not somebody who works in a nonprofit. I'm not saying you should earn buckets of money because you work with money from members who count on the money being used for actual impact and not for you to enrich yourself, but still it wouldn't be wrong to have like a decent income in general. So this strange relationship to money, it's about basically for many activists, for many people trying to create change, they see money as something bad, something nasty, something evil, and it can be all that, and it can be very distracting for people, and it can lead them down a wrong egoistical path, but it doesn't have to be. And I think we have to see money as a tool, as a means to an end, and for every end that we have in this world, for every ambition, for every dream, we can probably use money. And for big dreams, we can use lots of money. And every campaign that we want to wage on Facebook, on TV, every thing that we want to get to the people, get out there, it will cost money. And so for that reason, we should not be wary of money as activists, and we should be even welcoming becoming or getting a good income. So we can, for instance, donate more to good causes. If you look at the animal rights movement and the couple of maybe, I don't know, some like couple of dozens of $1 million that it has worldwide, not peanuts in relation to the meat industry, most of that comes from rich people, basically, from people who like giving large sums of money, philanthropy. It's not the most ideal system in the world because it's kind of like not very democratic, but still it's a way forward, right? So I would say maybe revise your ideas on or about money that you have, and also don't blame people in the movement who are doing something good. Don't blame them if they make some money with it, because, well, first of all, probably they're not going to get rich. Secondly, it is a way to be more sustainable. Like if you have to do it all without money, or if you have to do it on the income of a day job, then you can only rely on your free time, or the animals only have your free time to help them. You only have the weekends and the nights, right? While if you're making money with a vegan job, you're doing vegan work all the time, all days, right? So that will be a lot more impactful for animals. So I would encourage everybody to find a way that they can create an income, a sustainable and honest income from doing something good for animals.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, my personal journey is along that route. I left corporate world to come and work full time in animal advocacy. But sometimes I wonder if, I mean, depending on what job you currently have, if you know, if you're a really high paid CEO or something, or you're a lawyer or an accountant, it might be more impactful for you to keep your job, continue doing what you're best at, and using that money to donate it to the movement rather.
Yeah, absolutely. That could be the case. If you earn a lot of money, then with your donations, you might be able to pay more people, or to pay for more people's time than you could give with your own time, right? So if you could pay for 2 staff members at ProVeg, for instance, yeah, that would be doing more than you working yourself for ProVeg and not having that salary, unless you're, you're a very highly qualified individual who does better work than 2 other people, right? Or who has some like a certain skill set that other people don't have. So yeah, that's definitely a possibility.
Cool. And the second thing that you reminded me of when you were talking about the reasons for companies to be making vegan products is sort of the whole question around the reason for people to go vegan. You know, I think there's a lot of people who say, well, I went vegan for health reasons, or I went vegan for environmental reasons. And many advocates would say something like, well, you're not really vegan if you're not doing it for the right cause, or you're not really vegan, you're just on a plant-based diet because I can see you wearing a leather belt, so you don't really count.
Yeah, so this is, I talk about this a lot in my book. This is about the motivations that people have for going vegan. And some of us will say that a person who is vegan for health reasons is not a real vegan. I would say that's not the best idea, because it makes our small group even smaller if we're going to say like, that's not a real one and that's not a real one and these are the true ones, and yeah, it becomes a very tiny group. But more importantly, we see that in general, when you look at people's motivations to change, to reduce their consumption of animal products, health is the highest, scores the highest on that list. So more people tick the health box than any other box, right? It's not the same for vegans, actual vegans, but for meat reduction, it is like that. So it seems that health is actually a motivator that we have to use. And you might say like, look, I don't want to talk about health. This is not about health. This is about the animals. And that again would be an idealistic approach, because a pragmatic approach would say like, look, if this helps, then it helps. If it has results for animals, then that is a good thing, right? That's the first thing. And secondly, if you don't believe that, then I'll go one step further. And we know from research that people change in their motivations, right? And somebody who became vegan for health reasons can and will often end up becoming a vegan whose most important motivation is actually the animals. And as soon as you are motivated for something, anything, you know, by something, by anything, by health, by economical reasons, by taste, whatever, and you change your behavior, right, and you start eating vegan food, it will become much easier to convince such a person of the importance of animals. Why? Because they already are eating vegan food and they can be less defended against the reasons, against these animal concerns. A normal meat-eating person, they would not want to hear often what you have to say. You know, all these people say like, I don't want to watch Earthlings because I will have to go vegan then. So I don't want to go vegan, so I won't watch it, right? But if people are already or have already experienced that eating vegan can be a nice, good, tasty, convenient, affordable thing, then they might be much more open to you explaining to them that animals matter and they have rights and they suffer, etc. Right? So you don't always have to start out with all these facts and data about animal suffering and animal exploitation and whatever, because people often will not want to hear it, right? It can often be more impactful to start with other reasons that they may already have or understand, or it may be more impactful to start actually with behavior change, with like trying to make sure that for whatever reason they eat vegan food, and then they will grow into appreciating the importance and the concerns about animals.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And I think at ProVeg, we have our 5 pros, and, you know, it's pro animal, pro environment, pro health, pro justice, so the food justice side, and then the last one is pro taste. And I think a lot of advocates are forgetting how important that part is, where someone doesn't want to watch Earthlings because then they're going to have to go vegan, and that seems scary. And one of the things that I personally love doing is vegan food sampling, and it's one of the most amazing things to watch, because we've been in places, we've been in situations where we're doing food sampling and we've either run out of food or the electricity's gone off, so we can't make more nuggets. We did a lot of fries nuggets at UCT for a few years now. And all of the really excited volunteers are like, well, it doesn't matter, we'll go out without the nuggets and we'll just take flyers and talk to people. And without doubt, every time that happens, it's, you know, it's literal tears. Promoters coming back and saying, I can't believe how mean people are when I try and talk to them about veganism. And you can contrast that immediately with the general atmosphere around the stand, where people are coming to eat these chicken nuggets. They think they're chicken nuggets, and it's, you know, it becomes like it's a very predictable experience. Hey, would you like to try a nugget? What are these? Oh, these are the try one. I'll tell you why they're so amazing. And the person tries them, they enjoy it, and you say, it could have been one of the best nuggets you've ever had. And they say, yes, it's a really good nugget. And there's no turning back from that for them to go like, oh, no, I don't like vegan food. Once they've acknowledged that this tastes really nice, and then you say, well, what's special about it is that there's no antibiotics, there's no hormones. It's actually 100% plant-based. It's a vegan nugget. There's no chicken in there. And then you get these big, tough rugby guys who, you know, would be the antagonistic guys, usually calling their buddies to be like, you have to taste this. This is so amazing. And then they ask those questions: are you vegan? Like, what else do you eat? Is everyone behind the stand vegan? And it's the opposite of the backfire effect in psychology. The backfire effect is when someone puts the defenses up. It's like you create this curiosity. And I don't really care if people go vegan. I want people to go vegan, but if they just go and eat more of these nuggets and take these nuggets to Bry's, or take schnitzels to Bry's and eat them and tell people about them, and they are then way more likely to ask those questions, and then, like you said, transition to be like that for other reasons. And I think this yeah, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I was wondering, so I agree, and it seems that like I always say, like if you have one metric for an organization like ProVeg, or even for an individual, one metric that you could judge your success by, it could be how many people have I given a great vegan taste experience this year? And the higher that number is, the better. I wanted to ask you, related to handing out nuggets, what do you think is the limiting factor there? What are you constrained by? Is it the amount of nuggets you get sponsored from companies, or the amount of people that are helping, volunteering to hand out those nuggets, or the amount of people that want to eat them? Or what is it that would prevent you from distributing more nuggets?
Yeah, so I think our capacity constraint is opportunities and people. So we have I wouldn't say an endless supply, but we basically have an endless supply of samples. There will always be companies who want their product sampled. And again, this is where we talk about these corporate engagement partnerships, because it's sampling for them. And most companies would have a sampling budget. And if they go to an agency to get that sampling done, it's very expensive. For ProVeg to do it, it's either free, they give us the nuggets, we get them for free, and we're going to hand them out. Or if it's an event, for example, I really like doing sports events. So Cape Town Cycle Tour Expo, 30,000 people come through the expo, and we have handed out over 12,000 nuggets before, or more, but more or less 12,000 conversations. And so the restraint, the constraint is just how big our team is. Can we service these kind of requests from companies? So we're based in Cape Town at the moment. If someone says to us, can you hand out nuggets at a sports event or at a food event or an environmental event in Bloemfontein, we probably have to say no at the moment. So that's one of the reasons that we're working to try and increase our sort of volunteer database and starting regional groups in Durban and Joburg. And I think around the world it's underdone, because there is this tendency for people not to want to look like the marketing arm of a vegan company. We've been accused of that. Oh, you guys just are you the marketing arm of Fries? Are you the marketing arm of Beyond Meat or whoever? And sometimes it's easier because we have all the different products there. So then people don't get as confused. But I think it's something we should be doing more of. If it wasn't for COVID, we would have done a whole lot more this year as well.
Right.
And then I think that makes me think, when I think about what it looks like on campus, or what it looks like at the Cycle to Expo in the stand. I think it's in Veganomics where he talks about how one of the biggest barriers to veganism is people's perception of vegans, not so much the information that the vegans are trying to share. It's what people think of a vegan, and we're trying very hard to create this image of like a happy, healthy, vibrant, inspiring vegan. And I think there is a tendency for some people, not just in the vegan movement, but in any movement, social justice movement, for there to be the sense of like, I want to be a martyr for the cause. And seeing people out there having fun, seeing people on Instagram just posting pictures of their food, seeing people like influencers or just other advocates in the movement who aren't like working themselves to the bone for veganism. I think to me, it seems counterintuitive. You want to be inspiring, but then you get called out for, why aren't you doing more hardcore work, and rather than going for a run to keep fit so you can be an inspiring vegan?
Yeah, absolutely. This is some weird conceptions or ideas that we have about what has impact or what matters. And sometimes it feels like the most honorable activist would be somebody who's in jail for liberating one fox or something, like they would be in jail for 5 years, and that's like a honorable thing, but where is the impact, right? They're sitting in jail, and okay, it's kind of like noble to like sacrifice your life or your time and bear the consequences and become a martyr, like you say. But where is the impact of that? And then the other extreme would be like some lifestyle looking vegan on YouTube, and they seem to do well, and they have a lot of reach and 100,000 followers, and they seem to have like a normal life, and they inspire a lot of people. And like celebrities, they could get a lot of hate from some people. I don't know where that comes from. I don't know. I don't think it's logical. I think a lot of it might be explained by jealousy, basically, like I'm not in that position where I have so much impact and influence, so I'm going to attack that person and say that she's not like she's not doing it right, or she's not doing this, or she's not a real vegan, or whatever. So yeah, every time again, we have to like not look at all those irrational things, like how we feel about something, or how like, how noble this makes us feel, or how much of a hero, but actually at how much impact. And even if there are some less noble motivations that this YouTuber might have, like they might have, everybody has ego, everybody. I mean, you and me, everybody in this panel, every attendee has ego. We're not saints, right? So there will be, in everything we do, there's going to be some impurity in our motivations, and we have to just accept that, and it doesn't necessarily mess with the impact, or it doesn't necessarily affect the impact that we have for the animals.
I remember very clearly something you said to me when we did the CEVA training in South Africa. I was asking questions about, like, how do I go to advocates who are maybe doing things that I think might be counterproductive? How do I convince them to rather go and do something else? And you said something along the lines of, well, go and tell them what you're doing, and if they don't want to do what you're doing, then go and keep doing what you're doing, because it's better for you to spend your time actually doing activism that you think is useful than trying to tell other people what they should be doing. I think that's a big part of it. If we are attacking celebrities online, that's time that we could be spent actually talking to people about veganism.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of ways in which we spend our time, I think, very unproductively. Discussing about the last 1% of being vegan is one of them. Like this person is not vegan because they eat this, or this person has eaten that once last year, and so they're not a real vegan. Those are like such unproductive and useless discussions, and we spend a lot of time on these things often. And if you look at them, it's not helping animals, and our motivation there, subconsciously or consciously, is probably not helping animals either, but it's about feeling good about ourselves. It's about saying, like, I belong to this group, I'm following the rules, I'm putting all the hard work in, and they don't have the right to call them that. They can't carry the label because they're not putting all that hard work in that I'm doing, or something like wanting to be special, unique. So it's ego as well there, right? And I think nobody is free from that. I've certainly gone to that phase. I have my ego moments. The only thing we can do is to be aware of all that as much as possible. And if we become aware of it, next time we might see it for what it is, and not do it anymore.
Yeah, I think a nice thing that someone, my previous colleague Brett Thompson, said to me when I first started working in the vegan movement professionally, he said, there's two types of vegan advocates, and obviously there's lots of types, but he differentiated between two groups. He said there's vegan advocates who are trying to create a vegan world, and there's vegan advocates who are trying to create a vegan world for themselves. And it's actually quite easy to create a vegan world for yourself. If you can find yourself 30 vegan friends, a couple of vegan restaurants, and find some vegan events to go to, then it's, you can live quite a vegan world, and you can put your shutters on and ignore everything else, and then just hate on everyone else who's not vegan, and you can feel very good about yourself and about your little group of people. But that's a far cry from being able to change the world. And I think that often actually prevents people, if you have this us versus them mentality, it prevents people from coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's one of the main things we should do, is to be welcoming to everybody. And the more of an identity we have, and the more strict our identity is regulated or drawn with all these rules that we have, behavior rules and thinking rules and whatever, the more difficult it becomes to belong to us. Because the more excuses you give to people, like for people to say, oh, I don't want to be like that, or I don't want to be following all those rules, or I don't want to be doing all of that, So the harder we make it seem, the more rules that we have, the more it's going to look difficult for people, and the less people are going to join us, right? And we can make being vegan very, very difficult by saying you cannot ever have even the least additive in your food ever, otherwise you can't call yourself vegan, and you can't vote for this, or you can't be in favor of this, or you can't be against this. But then we're going to have a lot of criteria that make for a very small club, and we don't want a vegan club, we want a vegan world.
Yeah, I think that reminds me of something that for me personally, it's like when I left the corporate world, I used to have to wear a suit every day and be groomed and stuff. And then I was like, well, now I don't have to do that. So let's grow my hair a little bit longer, and let's grow a bit of a beard. I tried it, didn't work so well, but you get the sense that a lot of people are like, well, now I'm anti-establishment, and now I'm going to wear a tie-dye t-shirt, and I'm obviously speaking in generalizations, but I think there's something very powerful about being able to appeal to the masses, and also being able to go to, when we talk about institutional outreach, being able to go to talk to big business and for them to say things to me like, oh, you're not what we expected from a vegan. And I've been in meetings where people are talking about vegans, not really realizing that I am vegan. And, you know, the stereotype of the vegan is often the problem, the barrier that prevents people from wanting to know more and to sort of experiment more in this place, because they think they know what a vegan looks like. And as soon as we go out there and we like purposefully do that, you know, it's like for me, if the first thing someone knows about you is that you're vegan, or if we look at any sort of social justice thing, or just any sort of like differentiating between you and someone else, if the first thing someone knows about you is that you're different to them, then they assume that everything you think and say is going to be different to them. So when you meet someone and you find that there's a whole lot of stuff you have in common, and then you talk about veganism, that's usually a lot more effective than when the first thing they know about you is that you're vegan. And so I think the movement has this thing where we want to tell everyone how vegan we are. We want to wear the t-shirt saying, I'm vegan, and then we get surprised where people are like reluctant to talk to us about veganism because their food choices aren't like a passion for them, you know, in the same way that they are for us. And so I think that can put people off, where you make it, you know the joke, how do you know if someone's vegan? Oh, they'll tell you. I think that joke, as much of it is a joke and it's not always true, I think that is a barrier.
Yeah, I think that in an ideal world, we wouldn't have to like follow all kind of conventions and rules, etc. And we wouldn't have to like suit up and wear a tie if we don't want to. In this world, we could say like, okay, dressing myself the way I don't normally dress and that I don't really like is the smaller of evils, right? If I know that I'm going to like have more impact on people if I look like them, and that seems definitely to be true, then why not do that? Unless you're going to make of dressing the way you want to dress your top priority in life, which I don't think it should be compared to like all these other horrible things that are happening in this world today. So yeah, we live in a world where we have a message that is still hard to sell for many people. Let's not give people any excuse not to listen to that message. Let's not give them more excuses than they already have, right? So I would also argue like adapt to your audience, try to be like them to some degree, try to not turn them off the first time they see you, the first second, right? But make sure that they are receptive to what you have to say as much as possible. And the way you look, the way you behave, the way you talk will be definitely a part of that.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think it reminds me of, I'll paraphrase a quote from Ray Dalio, who's like the Steve Jobs of the investment world. And he says, don't be so caught up with how you want the world to be or how the perfect world could be that you don't see how it is now. Because if you can't see how it is now, you can't change it. And so I think it's really important that we acknowledge certain limitations that we have, especially if acknowledging those limitations will help us to make more change. On that, you know, so we're talking a lot about being more inspiring and not really talking just about the animals, but there is also the truth out there that animals are being caused a lot of damage. The animals are suffering. Where do you think the space is? Or do you think there is space for sharing graphic animal footage and for a militant approach?
Yeah, depends what you mean. Okay, militant and graphic are not necessarily the same.
Yeah.
So let's take them apart. Graphic images. I think there can be room for those, but there's a lot of like variation in how graphic things really are. You know, I've seen good pictures that are like really hitting it home, bringing the message home, but they're not gory or bloody, or you're not like going like this when you've accidentally seen them, right? You will be kind of like shocked, but it's not like so traumatizing as actual blood and gore and whatever. Like for instance, just to give an example, there's a picture by Joanne MacArthur, the famous animal rights photographer. I think it's of a rabbit, and it's a close-up of her eyes, and she sees another rabbit being caught in front of her, and you realize, okay, this rabbit sees what's happening with her fellow, and she sees what's going to happen to her. And that makes you identify and makes you care, and it makes you concerned. I mean, if you're a nice person, I guess, and it doesn't traumatize you. So that's an example of, like, I think a useful image that might be quite intense, but is nevertheless not graphic, right? So that's for the question about graphic images. The question about militantism and more radical action, etc. Like you asked, is there a place for that? I think there's a place for everything, and there's a time for everything. It might be that I often say of certain actions and interventions, like, okay, this seems to be like it could work, but maybe not at this time. Maybe in 5 years or in 10 years, right? I think we're doing a lot of things that we're doing too early. And I think many more of the radical groups, they would count on the fact that, look, if we all did this, if we all come to the streets, then we'll be able to push over the system and topple it and change it. But the fact is that at this moment in time, we're not all going to come to the streets. You know, the biggest animal rights manifestations, I think in Israel, they still only have 10, 15,000 people. I mean, that's a lot of people, but it's still not the huge masses, right? And that only happens once a year or once every couple of years. So we cannot mobilize, I think, enough people yet to actually really be pushing. So I think it is at this moment still more a time for the softer things, but I do believe that harder actions will be fruitful in the future once we have a bigger public support for those things. And I think you have to look at the public support to estimate the actual impact something's going to have. If you do something that has no public support whatsoever, then you're probably throwing in your own windows. If you do something when, people are behind you, then you can be more radical. Like, I can perfectly imagine that sometimes stealing an animal from a lab and after showing what was done to that animal might, in the eyes of many people, look justified, right? Stealing a pig from a factory farm is probably going to be less justified at this point in time, even though we're concerned with like food versus medicine, but still, when people might see how an animal is tortured in the vivisection industry, they might agree that taking an animal out of there, even if it's theft, is justified. If not now, then maybe in 5 years or whatever. So yeah, I think there is a place for militant activism, but I would always say, like, even that we can do politely and kindly and friendly and constructively. We don't have to like necessarily be angry or shout or call people evil or devils or whatever. Every form of activism, no matter how militant it is, we can do it in a relatable way, I think.
Yeah, I think both of the things you've spoken about now remind me of something that Melanie talks about when she does the CEVA training. She says something along the lines of, when humans see trauma, we immediately associate and we immediately pick a victim, a perpetrator, and usually also potentially a hero. And so when we share graphic footage, or when we're taking a more militant approach, we risk making the person see us as the perpetrator. So this trauma, we surprise someone on Facebook, or we surprise someone by making them watch something very graphic without their consent or without them knowing that we're going to do it. They feel trauma. Their brain automatically, subconsciously associates us as the perpetrator of the trauma, themselves as the victim, and everyone else who will say that eating meat is okay as the potential hero. And in a population where, in a world where 90-something% of people think that eating meat is perfectly fine, you just need to turn around to anyone else and you'll feel better about yourself after facing this trauma at the hands of a vegan. And then suddenly the vegans are the perpetrator. And the footage that you're trying to show them, the people hurting the animals aren't the perpetrators. But what Melanie does in her talks, she says to people, I'm going to show you something. It's going to be graphic. It's going to be disturbing. If you don't want to watch it, now's the time to close your eyes and stick your fingers in your ears. And it's short. It's a minute long. It's as long as is needed to make the point. And I was very surprised. She spoke in Cape Town, a couple of hundred people, or over 200 people. I didn't see a single person close their eyes or put their fingers in their ears. Everyone watched it, because I think when you invite someone to say, do you want to see what's actually happening, people are a lot more likely to do it. And then the way their brain works is like, you can't see the activist as the perpetrator. You can't like try and defend yourself against the activist. The activist is just giving you a message that you've consented to seeing.
Yeah, I can even notice with myself as a vegan, like when I see all of a sudden like a video automatically starting on somebody's Facebook feed of a cruel thing, I get angry at the person for posting that and throwing it in my face, something I don't want to see, which is not a very rational behavior, but still, like I can, if even I can feel it with myself, then certainly other people who are not vegan will be able to feel like that.
Well, that's also something Melanie talks about, is the emotional toll that has on activists and burnout. And so, not to bash anyone's social media strategy, but I know there are some people who like posting very graphic things on social media. Then non-vegans unfollow them. And they say, well, if you don't want to follow me, that's fine. I'm just going to post the truth. So then after time, what happens is you have a social media account that's only followed by vegans. And all you're doing is traumatizing vegans. And it's, if you've chosen to be vegan because you don't want to hurt animals, seeing animals get hurt every day it's not productive. It's not going to help you get more results. It's just going to make you feel worse. And I think that's one of the reasons that we see so much burnout and secondary post-traumatic stress disorder in the vegan movement. So I think we can do it. I agree with you. It just needs to be done strategically. I see there are a couple of questions here, so we have been talking for an hour. I know, Tobias, we could speak for days on these topics, but I just want to encourage everyone, if you are listening and you have any questions, pop those questions into the Q&A. We'll start answering some of them now and see how far we get. Let's see what we have here. So I'm just going to read them straight out. I feel that the foundation should start in schools to teach more about veganism. What is your view on this?
They're definitely important. It's a bit of a chicken and egg thing, though. I mean, if you want to start with the kids, you often need also the buy-in from the adults, either the teachers or the parents that the kids are going to run to after school, right? So the kids don't live, of course, in a vacuum, and you have to approach their context or their surrounding as well. But definitely, I think if students have a teacher that talks about these issues, that might be very effective. If not immediately, then maybe later down the road they might remember or whatever. So yeah, and I think that even as an individual person, not affiliated to an organization, this is something that you could do. You could set up a really nice talk and present yourself as somebody who speaks at schools and go to them, either paid or not. It's a really good thing to do. You have to also do it strategically. You could frame it in some sort of thing about sustainable eating or healthy eating, maybe, that sometimes you get more, your message becomes more attractive, and then you smuggle the animals in there. That can be a very interesting thing to do, I think.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, I think schools, because we have done some work with schools, and you have to have schools that are quite progressive. And you can imagine going to a school somewhere in a farming district where half of the parents are beef farmers, and their kid comes home and says, "Dad, what you're doing is terrible." That school is going to be in a lot of trouble. So the schools often just say no. We have had some success. We have had some volunteers who've gone and spoken at schools. We've obviously spoken at schools as well. And if the focus is on those things, on environment and on health, then the schools don't really have that much room to argue that it's not ideal. and then you can mention the animal stuff as well. And it's, you know, I think when you're pitching it as we want to come and talk to you about veganism, it's very difficult. We must also remember that it's very traumatic for a kid who, say you're 13 years old and you go to school and you learn about this stuff and you go home and you tell your parents, I want to be vegan. And the parents haven't got any of that education. And maybe they think that veganism is a cult. Maybe they think it's not healthy. And the parent is genuinely trying to do the best they can to raise their kids. And they tell the kid no. And now that kid has to, like, getting that kid to choose between veganism and their parents, which again is quite a traumatic thing. Not that I'm saying you shouldn't be doing that, but we need to make sure that any sort of advocacy around that is paired with the counseling around how you would speak to your parents about it or something like that. But there is some really good work happening in the schools. I think it's the Humane Education Trust. They're working on including animal-related messaging in syllabus. And, you know, things like health sciences, you know, I don't know what it's like now, but when I was at school, we were taught you have to drink a glass of milk a day. So just stuff like that, where if we can get the messaging that is telling people why they have to eat meat just out. You don't necessarily have to tell them why they don't have to, especially at a younger age. So we have to train kids to eat meat in the first place. So if we can just get parents to be happy to not do that, then we're going a very long way. So next question. And then the other thing, you know, for schools and for universities, programs like Meat Free Mondays and Green Mondays, I think works very well. We've got Green Mondays in some of the universities here. And I think that's something where it's like very accessible. Let's eat more environmentally friendly on a Monday and eat completely plant-based and talk about those benefits. And you'll find often the institutions that you talk to roll out more vegan stuff. And then obviously it starts really good conversations. And there's some really great stories about Meat-Free Mondays in Brazil, where they went and spoke to a district, and I think it was the mayor said, wait, this is actually cheaper and this food's really good. We'll make all of the meals by default plant-based, and if you really want to have a non-vegan meal, your parents have to write a note saying you want to have meat. And that changed millions of meals a year. Well, it was millions of meals a day, I think. And that wasn't, the decision was ultimately made on the price of the food rather than anything else, and the impact was huge.
Yeah, the only thing that you have to take into account there is, like, if you cannot guarantee that the food is going to be at least as good as the meat, then it's better not to do it, I think, because you're gonna put so many people off that it will just completely counter the effect of that you have with them not eating meat on that day, because they're just going to have the idea of veganism as something like, vegan food as something not tasty. So whenever you organize a campaign in schools for meatless meals, we work with the catering and make sure that they know what they're doing. It's not just a win because they say they're going to put vegan food on the plate. It's got to be good vegan food.
And I think that's something to keep in mind with your personal activism as well, with your friends and family. You know, we're talking about this purity thing. I had a friend who said to me, I really want to get my dad, he's diabetic and he's very unhealthy. I wanted to get him to eat more plant-based. And she eventually convinced him to try it for a week. And on the first day, she was a colleague of mine, she came to work and she was crying. Or the second day, so day 2. And I said, what happened? And she says, no, my dad said some bad words about her dad. I said, what happened? And she said, well, I'm putting such a huge amount of effort to give him really tasty vegan food, and he didn't like it, and he ended up going after dinner, he ended up going to Steers and getting a burger. I said, what did you feed him? And she said, well, a green smoothie for breakfast, and then like kale and quinoa salad for lunch, and then like a falafel thing for dinner. I said, well, what? You know, it's a big step. What does your dad usually eat? Well, he usually eats bacon and egg and like cheese and tomato sandwiches and takeaways. So that you need to understand that you can't go from being junk food, non-vegan, eat whatever I feel like, to eating the healthiest vegan food. Your taste is not going to enjoy that. And I think it's the same for canteens. I think I've seen programs where it's like, let's go change the menu, and they change it from standard American diet type of food to the healthiest possible whole food, plant-based, vegan. And you know, for us, the people who eat that kind of food, it's fantastic. But for the average kid or the average university students, it's not that great. So it's a good point. And I know that at least Green Mondays on campus, they prioritize making the food as tasty as possible and not necessarily trying to make it the healthiest and most perfect meal. Okay, next question here. Vegans manage their consumption and purchases in a way not to support animal harm. But people don't think about this when it comes to saving or investing their money for retirement, for example. Do you consider this when investing? And do you think there's a growing education around directing your rands towards vegan-friendly investments in the same way as vegan products and consumables?
Yeah, I don't work with rands personally, but I think where money goes is an important thing. I would say that if you focus on where your personal money goes, it is a bit the same as your consumption of food, right? It is focused on your own personal behavior, which has an impact, but not necessarily the biggest impact, right? If you're concerned about that, it would still be more interesting to do something institutional about it, like to start some kind of like financial startup advising people about green investments. Or one person I know has set up a vegan ETF, so exchange traded fund, a vegan version of the S&P 500. These are things that can, I mean, not I wouldn't be able to do that, to set up that thing, but things that can have a big impact. So I'm just saying, like, yes, finances are very important. Things go where money goes. But let's try to focus as much as possible, not on the individual change, but on the structural systematic change. And finance is a very important topic. So let's see, I mean, if we care about that, how we can create alternative solutions for people to invest their money in. Because, I mean, they're not there often, right? They're just completely absent. First of all, we have to create them.
Yeah, I know in the States there are companies that are starting to do it, and you can invest in a fully vegan ETF. And I think this is happening more and more. There's already been a big push around things like fossil fuels. So there's big organizations trying to get big investors and like people who are like fund managers not investing in fossil fuels. So I think we are starting to see it overseas. It's not huge at the moment, but I think it is something that we will see more and more. And I think it's one of those things, if we can get to the point where it's harder for companies to borrow money to start new companies that are in the meat industry, that would be fantastic. But I think that's going to be difficult while there is money to be made there, because they will, even if you restrict one bank's lending, and then suddenly, if there's still a huge demand for money in that space, someone else will provide that product. Someone else will come and lend that money to the person. Okay, next question here. When conversing with a non-vegan, where you had the full intention of trying to make them vegan, is it okay to exploit weaknesses in their personality or lifestyle to help them see the light, and that vegan is the only way? For example, if they own pets, trying to show them that all animals are the same, and just as you would not hurt your pets, you would not or hurt animals.
I wouldn't I wouldn't call this exploiting a weakness. I would see this as like confronting them with their values and trying to make them see the inconsistency in their values, or between the inconsistency between their behavior and their values. If they already love their companion animals, I think it's perfectly okay to ask them, like, okay, for you, I mean, and this can be a very honest and interested question, and it's not always easy for us to ask those in that way, but you could very interestedly ask them, okay, for you, you have this dog or this cat that you love so much, what to you exactly is the difference with the pig? And it is an interesting question, basically, and there might be interesting answers to that. So try to like be really interested in the answer, not think that you know the answer already, because then you won't listen, right? And then they might feel cheated, or they might feel like not having a real conversation with you. But if you do that out of a real interest, I think that would help. Just one more comment on this. Like, I know so many people are interested in like making people entirely vegan. Again, it's not an all or nothing game. I mean, if you can get them to 80% vegan, that is really a win, because if we have a lot of 80% vegans, that will completely change demand and supply, you know, and the system will completely change if we have enough of those. So let's not just focus on making everybody a perfect vegan. Let's also focus on getting enough people to reduce their consumption enough so that we have together a big societal impact, so we can topple the system and create the world that we want.
Yeah, I think I like what you said about making sure that you're actually listening, because I think actually finding out where someone is on the journey is really important. And I think we often often hear the term vegan amnesia, where it's like we forget how we were before we went vegan. So when someone says something like, you can't love animals and eat them too, it's like that might be a very logical sounding statement if you're vegan. And I kind of agree with that now. I kind of wouldn't eat an animal if I love animals. But I also know for 30 years, I genuinely was an animal lover and I loved eating animals too. So like trying to like find inconsistencies in people, or like win an argument or prove to them, you know, to say to someone, you know, there's no difference between your dog and a pig. You know, what you said, asking what is the difference? Because some people do see a huge difference as animals that are raised for eating and animals that are raised to be pets. And I'm not saying that that's right. I'm just saying that if that's how they feel, they're not going to listen to much of what you have to say if you just tell them that they're wrong. Okay, another question, one of the ones we got sent in. Do you think a vegan world is possible in our lifetime?
Depends on how old you are. But let's say if you're 30 or something, 20, yeah, I do think it is possible. I think that when people asked me this question like 10 years ago, and they asked like, do you believe that we can ever like stop eating meat altogether? I would have said yes, but I would have thought that like this was science fiction. This was something for the 23rd, 24th century, maybe. And so much has changed in the last 5 years or something that if they ask me that question now, I think that it might happen this century. It might not. There's a lot of things that can happen in every direction. But if things continue speeding up the way they are now, I would expect we get there by the end of the century, and maybe a lot sooner. Who knows? But yeah, I think there's every reason to be hopeful.
And then a follow-on question related to that is, would you consider a world where we eat a lot of lab-grown meat as a vegan world?
Yeah, I would. I mean, first of all, there's a difference to be made. Like if we allow for GMOs, genetically modified organisms, we could have cells that grow eternally, that can replicate eternally. So you'd have to like take one cell from a cow or from a pig, and then you have meat production for the rest of humanity's days, right? You could say like, no, it cannot be based even on one animal cell. Then I would think that's very rigid, because I don't see a problem with that. If we don't use GMOs, we might need a steady supply of a number of cows. There would be still thousands of cows every year, but it would be perfectly possible. I mean, if this would be the solution, it would be perfectly possible to give these cows a wonderful life, and they would die of a natural death, and they have the best lives. They could be like revered like gods, you know, and we just take like a small tissue from them once a year or whenever. And I would not see a problem with that. I think this is where we can get lost again in principles. If we say like, no, nothing should come from an animal, then we would ask you why. Why is that? Why do you think so? And my answer to that would be like, yeah, it cannot come from an animal when it is caused, or when it causes animal suffering or injustice or exploitation of animals. But when there's no harm done, then I wouldn't mind so much, right? So yeah, I would call a world in which we all eat clean meat, I would call it the vegan world.
And I think related to that is another question about pets. What do you think is the future of pets at the moment? I believe that adopting rescue animals is fine, but pets for any other reasons seems unethical to me. It seems like exploitation.
Yeah, I would also not do anything else than adopt. Now, that could, of course, bring us to the situation where all animals that are adoptable have been adopted, and then they would die out after that if we don't breed anymore. right? I would not be sure what I think of that. I mean, it might be an unlikely scenario, but I think there are benefits to humans having close relationships with some animals. I think that suppose, yeah, we don't have any animals in our surroundings and we're not close to any, what will that do to our appreciation of wild animals, for instance? And wild animals are also important. We also want to care about their suffering, I think, even though we have not caused their suffering. So maybe it's a good thing to be close to cats and dogs for us to be able to care more easily about the natural world. Maybe it's also a good thing to be able to love animals like cats and dogs for us to have an easier time loving other people. I think cats and dogs can teach us to love. Because they're easier to love than loving people for many people. So one thing can lead to another and they can make us better people. And if they're not suffering and if they have great lives themselves, then I would be in favor, I think, of having them around. I haven't made up my mind definitely about that, but I'm certainly not like 100% abolitionist on that front.
Cool. The next question here is from Canisius. Canisius asks, big population numbers of people who are eating dead bodies, animals in Africa is that of Black Africans, yet we have very few Black Africans who are vegan or take veganism seriously, and very few educational programs on veganism that are focused on this group. Do you think there will become a time when vegan advocates and organizations will focus more on changing the mindsets of the stakeholders of Africa, the Black Africans, for the interest of animals?
Yeah, maybe Don, maybe you're better qualified to answer that. I don't know that. I have been there to South Africa and I loved it there, but I don't know that much about the situation. So maybe.
Yeah, so I think there's two big parts of it. The one is when we look at total consumption of animal products. Obviously, in a continent where the vast majority of people are not white, the majority of the meat eating is going to be done, if we look at the total, by Black Africans. When we look at consumption per capita in South Africa, it's not the case that the majority of South Africans are eating the majority of the meat. You know, we live in a country where 40-something% of the country lives on the poverty line, and there are actually a really big number of people who are plant-based by necessity. They're living off sampan beans and spinach out of necessity, because that's the cheapest food that they can get. And so we need to sort of differentiate. And I think what Canisius is saying, yeah, is we're talking about the vegan movement, and there are not a lot of Black people in the vegan movement at the moment, and there's a growing number. If you go look, Sean the Vegan has got a really good thing on his Instagram celebrating Black vegans in South Africa. And I think the question about organizations doing more work in the space, I think that's already happening. It's definitely a priority that we're looking more and more into. I know Humane Society Africa has done work in the townships. There's even a Khoza cookbook. So there is work being done there. And I think at the moment, there's just a capacity constraint. There are so many places that we want to be working and not that many people working on it. So one of the things we land up doing is we land up working with the bigger organizations. Like you spoke about the importance of doing institutional work. It's like when we go and look at the big institutions, what are they worried about? And I can tell you when we talk to companies, they're worried about who's buying the most stuff. So it's like we can get Beyond Meat put into product. If we can do Beyond Meat sampling, we can do fry sampling, because the money's there. So one of the things that ProVeg is trying to do, and we're going to be rolling out in the next few months, is a lot more education around the sort of economic benefits. So we can eat a whole, a well-balanced plate, get all the nutrients we need on a plant-based diet. And so anyone who's in the situation where they think that they should be eating more meat for health reasons, hopefully that will be reduced. And the other thing we want to get more education around, and it's difficult to do this education without big reach, is this idea that, you know, the traditional African diet is not heavy in meat. Meat is a really important part of the culture. And, you know, traditionally meat was saved for occasions like weddings and other, important ceremonial occasions, and now it's eaten every single day. And I think that's part of the education that we need to get. And I look forward to connecting with Canisius again. I haven't seen him for a long time, so hopefully we can chat. Canisius, let's get in touch and see what we can do to speed up that transition. So the next question is a long question. We did talk about it a little bit with the questions about pets and how to talk to people, but a long question. So I'm vegan for 23 years now, and my boyfriend eats meat, even though I told him I can't be involved with the meat eater. After realizing that he was not telling me the truth about his eating habits, I tried to let it be. I gave him documentaries, asked him to come to an animal sanctuary. He agreed that what he's doing is wrong, but confesses he is selfish and doesn't want to inconvenience himself by stopping eating meat. He refused to go to the animal sanctuary as he knew it would turn, and he didn't want to feel guilty and change. Please help. How do I help him to choose to be more kind in his diet? He has stopped eating red meat, but still eats chicken and everything else. He is, however, eating more plant-based, and I'm an excellent chef and so healthy, fit, and strong. He loves my food and admires my fitness and health, and he won't change. This is breaking me. Any advice?
Yeah, I'm sorry you have to go through this. I can imagine it's very difficult. I mean, there's different ways to approach this or to see this. First of all, I don't know how long you have been with this boyfriend. Sometimes we need more patience than we have mustered so far. Sometimes this takes like quite some time to sink in. And one advice I sometimes give to people, maybe you're already doing that, but like you inform them and then you let go, then you give them space, and then you wait, and then you draw back, then you just be your happy self and you give a good example, and you leave them space to think and to come to their own conclusions, and you're not always there in their face because they can't think, or they might be resistant, they become resistant to you. So if you can bring up the patience, like even like a year or more years, there's a good chance that this will happen down the road, but not as fast as you want it. But of course, this depends on like how much how much more of it you can take. You could say, for instance, like I'm gonna give like myself an ultimatum, and I'm gonna give like give it a year, 2 years, and then I'm gonna say like, look, you don't have to tell him that, but you could say like, look, yeah, if it doesn't happen in 1 year or 2 years, then I'm then I'm out. Maybe that person would say like, look, okay, if you feel that strongly, if you want to end the relationship, this is not, I'm not saying you should blackmail him, obviously, but that could be the effect or what it comes down to. So maybe they would say like, look, if you feel that strongly about this, then okay, I will change. There's also the fact or the question like how rational is he? How much can you explain this to him? There is the fact of like, yeah, what do you expect? Like, do you want him to be an entire vegan, or would you be fine with him like eating like meat maybe once a month, or I don't know, to some extent? Do you want the perfection, or would you be very happy with this like almost perfection or whatever? You might be saying like, yeah, no, it has to be vegan. I cannot live with anything less, but accepting something less could be a step for him to grow into something more later. So it could be good to accept that for a while. I don't know what he does right now. Apparently he already did something. He stopped eating red meat. Is there a way to like make sure that at home he never misses the chicken he still wants to eat, and he doesn't eat it at home, and then maybe occasionally he does it out of the home? I mean, there's different kind of like ways you can find to live together. I also recommend the book by Melanie Joy, Beyond Beliefs, which is exactly about communication between people who are strongly differing in these things. And that book might be able to help you overcome this issue, right? This is just some pointers. Yeah, I wish you good luck with influencing him.
And then the next question here is about pets again, but about their food. Some vegans believe that their pets should be fed vegan pet food as they are associated to the owner. Do you believe that a pet should eat, that if a pet would naturally eat meat, they should rather eat vegan food, vegan pet food?
Well, I don't believe so much in the concept of what is natural and what is not. I think we can create any, down the road we'll be able to create any food in a healthy way, and give it all the nutrients that an animal or a human needs. So that is a technological issue, I think. Right now we know that dogs are omnivores and there's perfectly fine vegan pet food for them and they have no problem with it. Cats are carnivores, and for them it's more difficult, and you could say for them it is a natural. Again, I'm not convinced of the use of the term natural. You could say like, okay, what is natural about a cat still? Is it natural for a cat to eat canned food in which there's like slaughtered cows in there? Is that natural? So if natural had any relevance ever, it's long gone. So I would ignore that concept. I would look at like what is healthy for my cat and what has the lowest impact on animal suffering and on the environment. That's what I would do. As soon as there's cat food, and it already exists, but the research is maybe not entirely clear yet. There's no like long-term research yet. Definitely for dogs, fine. For cats, it's still a bit wait and see, but you could already perfectly try vegan cat food, or maybe reduce the meat intake and use some vegan food and some meat food. That's also possible. I don't think there's any duty that vegans have. I don't think we should tell other people that they're not a real vegan if they have non-vegan pets. This is one of the marginal issues. I mean, it's an important issue. It can have a lot of impact, but I wouldn't like judge people for doing this or that. I think they both can be honorable options.
Cool. There's a question about your comment about animals living long and being revered as gods. It says, did I hear correctly Tobias saying that animals might then live long and be revered as gods? I am vegetarian moving towards being vegan. How do we think as a movement the ecosystem will survive if everyone joins us? I assume she means there's going to be lots of animals. She needs to be able to answer this in case someone asks her.
So for the first thing, what I meant with gods was just I mean, people might say like, no, every use of any part of an animal is totally wrong. I'm just saying like there might be cases in which animals have a wonderful life, better than the life of any person or better than the life of any wild animal. And we get something, we give a lot and we take those cells in exchange, and they can be treated very, very well. That's what I meant by being treated like gods. And they could die a natural death. So they wouldn't be killed when after a year or something, or half a year. How do we think as a movement the ecosystem will survive if everyone joins us, if everybody becomes vegan? I mean, there seems to be no issue, on the contrary, with everybody going vegan in terms of the environment. It would be a relief for the environment. I'm not sure if you want to type something more, because I'm not sure if I understand the question entirely, but yeah, there's no bigger impact on the environment if we go vegan. On the contrary, there would be normally a lower impact, unless like we're talking like hyper processed foods that could be maybe more impactful than some animal foods, but that's more, yeah, like a marginal case. So yeah, shouldn't be an issue normally.
Yeah, I think some people, non-vegans, would say, if everyone went vegan tomorrow, what would we do with all these animals? And then they would just breed and like be completely out of control, and there would just be cows everywhere. But I think obviously we don't expect the vegan world to go vegan overnight. And animals don't just the animals on farms at the moment don't just naturally breed in the numbers that they're breeding. That is, we are purposefully, a farmer goes and takes a cow, or more common in South Africa, a farmer just goes and impregnates the cows themselves. So if everyone transitioned to a vegan diet, there just wouldn't be lots of farm animals around. And farm animals and the grain and the food for farm animals takes up so much space. If the farm animals disappeared, then we would just have way more space again, hopefully, to turn that back into natural vegetation and have wild animals again. And Carl asks, your thoughts, please, on a class action case against the false marketing that animal agriculture is known for in terms of their health claims, welfare to animals, etc. Do you think there's any purpose for us going after some sort of legal action against companies that are making claims that their animals are happy or that their products are super healthy when they're not?
Yeah, I think this would not be a bad idea. I mean, basically what the meat industry has just done in Europe is to go after the names of veggie burgers, as some of you may have seen. Like, so they wanted it to be the case that vegan producers could not call a vegan burger a burger, and that this name would be exclusively meant or be used for animal products. So they said that we were misleading the consumer with these terms. Like, the consumer would expect a burger to be meat and they don't get meat, and then they're all confused and whatever. It's of course a fake argument to protect their profits, but they were accusing us of being misleading. And I think, like, yeah, we could just as well accuse them of being misleading in a lot of ways. And for instance, you could try to make sure in some country, if you have the skills and the expertise, etc., to like organize something where, and it has been done by consumer organizations, and this would be probably your best friend or ally, where consumer organizations challenge certain claims or statements on packaging or whatever, and so that the producer has to withdraw that. And this could also be done certainly with health claims, but also with animal welfare claims. Like, we have words in our Dutch language for chickens or chicken eggs that sound like the chicken has had a very happy life. Like free range, right, is an example like that. Free range sounds like it's a very good life, but it might be totally misleading. And that would be not the intention, of course, of using, I mean, the intention of using such a word shouldn't be to mislead people. So you could like say like, okay, let's try to like tell these people and tell government that this is actually a misleading claim. I do believe in things like that, and they can, on top of that, they can create a lot of media attention for the cause.
Yeah, and surprisingly, there is already quite a bit of legislation stopping companies from making false claims. So I know in America, for sure, like the egg industry is really limited in what they can say about the health benefits of eggs. They get dietitians to say that eggs are healthy. It happens in South Africa as well. You have a lot of dietitians who are convinced that eggs are very healthy, but when you look at the packaging of eggs, you can't call an egg a health product or whatever. And so there are things being done there. And I know the other question is, do we get labeling on, like, you know, the same way that tobacco was labeled as dangerous and causes cancer and stuff like that? That might be something that gets looked into more and more. And the other one I saw recently in South Africa is labeling for the environmental impact of your food. So you have like a different color code depending on the environmental impact of your food. And obviously then meat products would score very badly, and anyone who cares about the environment would not want to be eating those.
Yeah, those would be, I mean, these are all value driven or yeah, criteria that relate to values, like environmentally friendly, animal friendly. Of course, the best way to like get people to buy more of these things would be price. Lower the price of these products, and unfortunately some producers are actively looking to decrease the price of their vegan products. That's, I think, a very important point. Right now, most of these things are still quite a bit more expensive than their meat counterparts.
Okay, I've got a couple more questions, and I think we're going to start winding up, so people can, those of you who haven't had dinner, including myself, can still get some dinner in. And the next question is just, health is such a big driver for food choices, and you mentioned it earlier. What is ProVeg doing in this space? So, I mean, I think I can answer that. We do have a big focus on that area. We've had a couple of webinars. We had a really big webinar on staying healthy during stressful times during COVID. We had a webinar on plant-based for athletes, and we have a webinar coming up in the beginning of November for anyone who's interested in plant-based diets for pregnancy and raising young kids. And then really, really exciting thing that's happening that we're kind of involved in some way. There's an organization called the Physicians Association for Nutrition. It's a Berlin-based organization that kind of networks physicians who are pro plant-based and trying to get plant-based into sort of the medical space. And we're working with some doctors to start Pan South Africa. So you can look that up on social media at the moment. We're still busy launching it, but that should be really big. And they've already started doing some work with the Public Health Association of South Africa and the South African Medical Research Council. And then we are looking into some sort of interventions in terms of, like, you know, what's been done overseas. Find a group of people, put them on a plant-based diet, and preferably people who have pre-existing health conditions. And again, to talk to Canisius, what he asked is, I think there'll be a focus on that, is finding under-resourced communities in South Africa where health is a big issue. And we know in South Africa has become the first African country where lifestyle diseases outnumber, deaths from lifestyle diseases outnumber infectious diseases. And that's a public health burden to the government. So I think that's something that there's going to be a much bigger focus on in the future. And then, Tobias, are you planning on writing another book?
I am writing at this moment a novel with animal rights related themes, which I haven't done before.
So it won't be like a textbook of how to go vegan. It's going to be a novel.
Yeah.
That's very exciting. We will look out for that. And just on Tobias's book, it is available online. At the moment, it's not in South Africa, but ProVeg is working very hard to get more copies. We have already shipped in 2 batches of books. And so in the next, it takes a few weeks or maybe a month. So if you are looking for a copy of Tobias's book, please just drop us an email or message on social media, and we will get back to you when they arrive in South Africa. But I think that's all the questions we have. Oh, I just want to address, I was reading this and some of the comments about going into restaurants, non-vegan restaurants, and asking for vegan options. I think one of the things that Colleen said, which I think she's right, is that, you know, sometimes it's just easier, and like we don't want to have to go and like fight with people. And I think, Tobias, you can give your views on this as well, but I think it's very important that as vegans and as people in the vegan movement who are inspiring other people to go vegan, there shouldn't be this expectation that when you go vegan, you're definitely going to be a vegan activist, or as soon as, if people think that if they go vegan, they have to be a vegan activist or advocate, that is a big barrier to them making change. Tobias, do you have any views on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, being or going vegan is already more than difficult enough. If people also believe that they have to be an activist and they have to become a leftist and they have to become pro this and pro that and against that, that's going to make it all much more difficult. So yeah, I mean, we want to have billions of vegans. We're not going to expect them all to be activists, right? They're going to be like normal consumers among them. Of course, you expect them to be, if they care so much that they become vegan, you would expect them to also want to convince other people. But of course, an activist can be, or you can influence other people in many ways. You can do that by inviting people and showing them pictures on your Instagram feed or whatever of the food you make, etc. So there's many ways to do something. The more you do, the better. I would turn this around. So not all vegans should be activists, but also not all activists don't necessarily have to be vegans, right? And accept and appreciate that some people might be doing great things for the animals without being 100% vegan or consistent in those things. And actually, a non-vegan activist would probably be doing more than a vegan non-activist, right? They might be reaching a lot more people and helping them to reduce their meat consumption while not being perfect themselves. And I see so much sometimes hate for people who are not like entirely consistent, like Ricky Gervais, if you know him, the comedian. Yep. He cares a lot about animals. He has a reach of millions of people, but I think he's not vegan yet, right? And then people complain and the vegans are going to comment on his feed, etc. But I mean, this guy has a reach of millions of people. You don't have that as an individual activist, probably, I'm guessing, right? So who's having the most impact, right? And moreover, it could even be that by not saying that he's vegan, or by not being vegan even, he has a bigger impact than if he were vegan. Because for many people, vegan is a very high threshold. And if you say like, look, I'm 90% vegan or something, you might have a more attractive message than if you were entirely vegan. Not to vegans, you're not more attractive to vegans, but you might be more attractive to non-vegans, which is the most important thing.
Yeah. So I want to add two things there. The one is that, especially for people who are like very active in the vegan scene and really want to dedicate their lives to this, you don't have to do it 100% of the time. So, we have to be, the most important thing in terms of like the movement is that the people working in it can work on it for a long time. So we want to avoid burnout, and we want to be able to take some time to like care about ourselves and make sure that we're healthy, both from a physical point of view and a mental point of view. And that's linked to what you were saying about the link there for me is that when I first went vegan and first started getting into this, I was, well, just after after about a year, I was working in it full time. I had a job at Fry's as the brand manager. I was a director of the South African Vegan Society. I was working on Meat Free Mondays. I was working with Vegalicious in Cape Town, and it was like my whole life. And sometimes I'd want to go to dinner and not talk to everyone about veganism for the 4 hours that I was supposed to be having like a relaxed dinner with friends. And it was amazing to have one of my best friends would sit next to me eating his steak, and someone would ask me why I'm eating a falafel burger and ask me about veganism, and he would answer on my behalf. While eating his steak, he would first defend me, and then, he's a funny guy, so he would like make jokes, but like point out the absurdity of someone attacking me for eating vegan. And it was amazing to see how like hard hitting he could be without people getting defensive. Where I know that if I had said anything even vaguely that offensive, people would be like, "Oh, don't get so offended." It's different when the message is coming from someone who you think is judging you. Where the non-vegan, he's not judging you. He can't, because he's literally sitting eating the steak. And so people listen to the message way more if they don't think that you're different to them, which again, we mentioned that a little bit earlier. But thank you, Tobias. I think we've gone through all of the questions that were asked. I just have a couple of closing remarks. Tobias, do you have anything to say before we close?
No, thank you for listening, everybody. Thanks for the questions, and I wish you good luck in everything you do there. I know some countries have an easier time than other countries in terms of vegan advocacy and vegan options, and yeah, I think that for instance, United States and Western Europe are a bit ahead of you, but I'm sure that with ProVeg and with all of your efforts, you can catch up. And yeah, I'm guessing that within this and a couple of years, it's going to be still a lot more vegan friendly and a lot more easier, maybe by the time I come next time.
Thank you very much, Tobias, and thank you for paving the way. So much of the stuff that you and other leaders of this movement have done have made it easier for us to sort of jump on board and not have to go through some of the difficulties that we may have had to go through if we didn't have resources like your book and your blog. Also, a huge thank you to Caroline and Nanine, my teammates at ProVeg, who are working behind the scenes and who allowed this webinar to happen. Just a reminder, we will be sending out a post-event email. Please, if you have any more questions, email us. If you want to get involved, email us. We have volunteer posts. We would love to have more people around South Africa getting involved when we do have campaigns. We do have a couple of jobs available in South Africa at the ProVeg, in the ProVeg office. Just go onto proveg.com on the international page. If you go there from South Africa, locate you to the South African page. Just go to the international page, go to jobs, and you'll see there are a couple advertised there. We're always looking for volunteers. We have some really cool campaigns coming up. The next big one is Veganuary. I'm sure everyone on this call has heard of Veganuary. ProVeg South Africa is the official local partner for Veganuary 2021, and we really want to make it a big thing. We've got some really cool brands on board as well, and hopefully some retailers. And so if you are interested in taking part or helping us to spread the reach of Veganuary, please get in touch either on social media or on the website. You will see our contact details, and we'll send out contact details obviously in the post event email. So thank you very much, and hopefully I'll see some of you in the vegan scene in South Africa.
Good night.
Cheers.